For those of you who don't know what NDI is, it is an American NGO that has been working to promote Roma civic and political participation since 2003. So we have a little bit of experience, I would say. Since then, so for more than 15 years now, we have worked in 7 countries with a targeted program, and that includes Bulgaria, Hungary, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia. We have engaged in more than 400 municipalities and communities, and worked directly with somewhere around 6,000 Roma individuals through our political and civic initiatives. And in fact, Mimosa Gavrani is a great representative of what we had done with youth, and particularly young Roma women in Kosovo. I've known her for about 5 years now. The one thing, and I personally have been overseeing our Roma programming for 10 years, ever since I started at the National Democratic Institute. The one thing that we have learned in all of these years of work is that there are a set of barriers that Roma face in trying to become more politically and civically active, particularly when it comes to elections. And that is the topic that I'm speaking on today. And although one of the challenges in being in the later panel is that you've had a lot of other people that may have said similar things before you, it's actually a good thing because it shows that we are all focused on the same issue, we are all on the same page, and we have a mutual understanding of these challenges and the things that need to be done to hopefully resolve these challenges. As several of the speakers before me underscored, democracy can only truly work when all segments of society are free to participate, make their voices heard, and to influence political change without suffering bias or any sort of reprisal. And it's unacceptable that in Europe, in all of your countries, in the 21st century, that the Roma population remains largely excluded from the political process. As several people have mentioned, and we all know very well, the Roma are the largest ethnic community, and there are diverse estimates, but there's been estimates anywhere from 6 million to 15 million, depending on who you ask. And one of the challenges that was brought up before is that we don't know the exact numbers and where these people live. So it makes it even tougher to figure out how to broach the communities and who to speak with. And of course, the big challenge is that despite those large numbers, and of course they vary between the countries, the participation is staggeringly low and extremely disproportionate. We already noted today that at the European level, here in Brussels, we have 3 Roma MEPs. Now 3 is good, but it's only 3, considering the size of the population. The good thing is we have 2 that are continuing, and then the great thing is now we have Peter Pollack, who joins the ranks as a very prominent Slovak Roma political leader. If you look at the national parliaments, the situation is very similar. Some countries have a few, some have none, but also there's a question of, are they even effective? Because when you only have one voice in a sea of 200 representatives, what can they really do? The only place where we've seen more movement and more progress is honestly at the local level. Maybe there is something to the phrase "all politics is local," because especially in countries like Slovakia and Romania and a few other places where we've seen a real rise in a positive way of the number of Roma elected to local council and to mayoral posts. So why is political representation so low? Well, the topic of today, of this panel, is the election process. So how do Roma experience the election process? And in the past 15 years of looking at this situation, the electoral process is one of the key elements to getting Roma elected. It is the first major barrier to get into local level or national level parliaments or European level parliaments. So overall, NDI has narrowed it down to about 7 key barriers to political participation in general, and we define it as competing for office, serving as an elected official, or exercising a right to vote as citizen. And 6 of those 7 barriers actually have to do directly with the electoral process. So you can see that that is one of the big issues. And I know that Sarita actually mentioned some of them as well, and James alluded to some of them in his presentation. So the first one, and the biggest one, is the lack of political will. Within the countries, within the mainstream, within ruling parties and coalitions, and even at the EU level, though this is changing a little bit, but there is lack of political will to encourage Roma from participating in politics, whether voters or candidates. There's entrenched prejudice, often perpetuated by the media. There's a ton of scapegoating, which is we also talked about already. And the rise, especially recently, in anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma sentiment, all of this needs to be addressed at the national levels, first and foremost, because when you have politicians, national leaders, equating Roma citizens to awful things, or saying that, you know, when the migrants are coming, they're just as bad as Roma. You know, you can't say statements like that and expect people to have a different feeling. You're giving them, you're populating minds with horrible perceptions of Roma citizens. And this feeds directly into the electoral process, because if Roma feel like they're not being listened to and being persecuted, why would they go? Why would they go vote? Why would they stand for office? The second big issue are the actual electoral mechanisms and political systems in the different countries. Now, the challenge is that each country has its own set of mechanisms, so this isn't the same across the board, but some of the challenges are reserved seats, for instance, like in Romania. While they're good, they often are just token seats. They don't really mean anything. The person who occupies that post is not really going to have much voice. And also, it precludes competition within the Roma themselves, because if one Roma party makes, you know, some sort of a deal with another party that they will occupy that post, they will sit there for 20 years and nothing will really change. The bigger issue, though, are actually parallel institutions. And I'm talking about the national minority councils in Serbia, the minority self-governments in Hungary, for instance. These are institutions that these governments created partially as a result of EU accession processes to show that, yes, we are addressing Roma participation. But these structures have no political power. They're largely symbolic, and they're underfunded. And because there's often lack of understanding among the Roma community of what they do, especially in Hungary now, there's this issue because if you vote for a minority, then you can't vote for another political party. There's a lack of understanding of how these mechanisms actually are used to promote Roma political engagement. The third big issue, and this is actually one of the largest, I would say, and perhaps I should make this as the first one, is the low voter turnout among Roma. And this is affected by a whole group of factors. The first is, and again, this has been raised before, the general mistrust of the political system and political leaders. And that stems from years of discrimination, isolation, lack of follow-through on any promises made. And so Roma are less likely to cast their votes, either for a mainstream party or even a Roma candidate in some cases. Oftentimes there's challenges with proper documents. If Roma cannot get a voting card or some sort of an ID, they cannot access the political process. They cannot go vote. That needs to be resolved. Everyone should have a document that shows who they are and that they have an equal right to go and vote in a polling place. We've already raised the challenge of voter intimidation. There is oftentimes severe voter intimidation. And so that even if a Roma person can get to the polling place, there are thugs and bullies standing outside from a mainstream party or whatever party, and they basically shun people away, or they threaten them. And so that makes it much harder, and they do this even in the days before election, so that they make sure that they don't turn out. And along with that is the whole issue of vote buying, because that is still a very common practice. especially in communities, in very poor, remote communities. Often it is through the local loan sharks, as we very well know, or parties that are, even in countries where there's legislation that actually, precludes vote buying because they can get fined for it, they find alternative ways to do it. So they'll throw a football tournament with some, beer and whatever else. Come and join us, and we're this party. And it's not vote buying per se, but it is still influencing the people. Access to polling stations is a challenge. If you have a segregated Roma settlement and the nearest polling place is 50 kilometers away, and there are bad roads or no transportation, who's going to go? So that's a huge issue. And of course, one of the other challenges is lack of education on all levels. Both, we're talking about education in school, but civic and voter education. People don't know their rights. If people are intimidated or are offered to sell their vote, they don't know that there are often authorities they can turn to. They don't expect people to respond to complaints, and so all of those feed into why Roma citizens don't turn out to vote. I mean, would you, if that was what you were faced with? This is a common and prevalent issue among Roma communities. In terms of candidates and Roma standing for candidate office at the local or national level, the lack of outreach by mainstream parties to Roma, and in many cases, even if they do reach out, the manipulation of Roma by political parties is very, very prevalent to this day. We've seen over the last 10 years some interesting trends because on the one hand, some parties, especially when the EU strategies came out, it's become a little bit more of a sexy topic. And so some of the parties would say, okay, we'll create a Bureau for Roma or a Department for Roma issues. Maybe we'll offer 1 or 2 Roma place on the candidate list, but we'll put them all the way at the 100th position, so they will never have a chance of getting it. But hey, we have Roma running for us, and they're going to go out and get votes for us, so our party can win. And the interesting thing here is that if the mainstream parties actually do have a genuine interest in promoting Roma issues, it works very well. And I'm going to turn now to the newest member of the European Parliament from the Roma community, Peter Pollack. He is a product of when the collaboration with the mainstream party works well. Peter started coming to our trainings at NEI in 2001, before we had a Roma program. We just did training for politically active youth. So he came with all the other non-Roma to participate in that training because he was already interested back then. When we started the program, a full Roma political participation program in 2004, he was one of the first people to join. He ran his first campaign in 2005 for regional elections. He lost. That didn't stop him, because at that point, it was still too early in the country to see a Roma candidate at that level. He went to a few more workshops, talked to his peers, formed networks, built a team of volunteers who could help him, and he ran again in 2009, this time for regional government again. And his campaign had improved 300% from his first try. But the situation, the political situation has changed, and you have to think about those dynamics as well. Most HID, which is the predominant ethnic Hungarian party who also caters to Roma citizens in Slovakia, offered him a spot on their list in the 2010 parliamentary elections. But they didn't put him high enough on the list. They didn't promote him. They didn't give him the space to really show who he is. So of course he lost. And it wasn't until he found a party that would genuinely support him, in this case, it was a movement, Ordinary People, Independent Personalities, Olano, that he was able to win. So before the 2012 parliamentary elections, they came to him, the leader of the party, Matovic, went to him And he said, I truly think that you would make a great candidate. He was placed in the top 20 because Slovakia has a list, but also preferential voting. He was placed within a space where if he moved up just a little bit, he could probably win. It was a risk for the party. This was the first time the party ran, so we had no idea how many seats they were going to get, or if they were even going to get into parliament. But it makes a big difference when the party then sponsored Peter's media campaign. He would travel with the president and go speak to people. They had a targeted outreach because they already knew which Roma communities are going to be behind him, but he needed to, as somebody who was running on a mainstream party list, he needed to attract the non-Roma votes. So he was looking at communities where there is more openness, and those are the communities he targeted. And he won, becoming the first Roma member of the Slovak parliament since the dissolution of Czechoslovakia in 2012. But then again, here's another example of when the party screws up. In the re-election in 2016, the party was so assured that all of the people who are currently in parliament are going to win again, that they had a very interesting strategy. All the incumbent MPs were put at the very bottom of the party list because they said, oh, well, they already know us, so they'll preferentially vote us up, so we're still going to get in, and we'll put the newer people up there, so they get exposure. Well, that, of course, failed because maybe some of the people who were, non-Roma MPs did get all the way up there. Peter was still very new. He had only one mandate. He didn't have a chance to make a name for himself yet, and so he lost. And I think they learned their lesson, which is why this year they tried a different approach, and now we see Peter going above national, and now he's joining the ranks of the very few members of the European Parliament, and hopefully he will be able to make a name for himself here. And two more points before I move it over to my colleagues. One of the challenges that we see, and this particularly plays out at the local level, is actually the discord and disunity among Roma political leaders who are competing for office. And there's already, when you're thinking about the fact that there's already a low voter turnout among Roma, and you have maybe, a small community where there are 2 seats open, and you have 6 or 7 Roma leaders from that same community running for the same spot, you're going to split the vote, and nobody's going to win. So that is one of the challenges that we've been working with on explaining why it is important to unite, because there's always going to be 1 or 2 stronger candidates. So isn't it better to put your weight behind those 1 or 2 candidates, get them in, and then see if you can bring in more people into council or national level. And the final point that I'll raise, and this also stems from the work that we've done, is we've always had discussions about, well, is it better to run on a Roma-specific party as an independent or a member of the mainstream party? It depends. It depends on your community, it depends on the political situation, it depends on who you have in the local council or in the national parliament and how they will support you. Oftentimes, and we don't advocate for one or the other, but what we've seen happen more often than not are that Roma who align themselves, even tangentially with the mainstream parties, have a higher chance of getting elected for the reasons that we've already discussed with Peter, for instance. And it's a similar message that my colleague had mentioned earlier as well. And the focus on if you're only focused on issues that matter to the Roma community, you're probably not going to win the votes of the mainstream community either. This is not to say that you shouldn't focus on those issues. Once you are in local council or once you're in parliament, by all means, do focus on those issues. But you also need to look at it in the context of how, if we solve this one issue that's important to the Roma community, how is it going to benefit everyone else? If we improve education and we get more Roma working, they're not going to receive as much, they're not going to need as much assistance, that money can go elsewhere. If we have roads that Roma can use use to get to the main community and get access to jobs and other things. There's all these larger issues that need to be connected. And if you're also trying to win the support of the larger community, especially when you're in a community where the Roma are the minority, you need to win support from your fellow council members or, mayor who may not agree with you. So you need to think about the larger issues, or you need to think about socioeconomic issues as a whole, because there are other poor members of communities who are not Roma. And in countries where there are multiple ethnicities, in some communities Roma are better off than their Albanian neighbors or Serbian neighbors or whatever that may be. So you need to think about it in a more holistic way. So those are the main points I'm going to make. And I'm just going to add one to highlight how complicated this issue is and why I think there are still so many challenges. Is there additional external factors that we need to consider? Again, to stress that the Roma communities and the countries in which we operate are not heterogeneous. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. You have to look at the communities individually. You have to look at the political situation individually. And the socioeconomic challenges that affect the communities often trump any electoral issues, because if you don't have food on the table, you're not going to care about the political process. You're going to figure out how to get food on the table. You're going to figure out how to get clothes on your children. And those are going to have to be resolved before you're going to see any people running for office or going to vote. But the other big thing, and this I think affects many of the people around the room today, is that the importance of Roma civil society cannot be stressed enough. It is one of the most important things that we have, because the civil society members are the ones that can hold elected officials accountable, both Roma and non-Roma. Because if you have a person elected to office from your community, but he or she are not doing enough, it's your job to call them out on it, but it's also your job to support them when they're doing the right things. It's your job to advocate, it's your job to inform and to educate. So, in summary, there are several key issues that we're working with and dealing with when looking at Roma political participation, but we are seeing progress, even if it's at the smallest level, even if it's not in every country. And we just need more. We need more political will, we need more support from the Roma community itself, and we need education. Thank you.